and say that I felt completely powerless at the beginning of the process. I'm used to receiving information about problems and kind of like creating solutions. So I found it really, really hard not to kind of like jump in with advice and suggestions and could we do this and could we do that. I also felt very, very humble, listening to people's lived experience, listening to their stories, listening to their realities, and how kind of like different it was from my own.
It's probably would be one of the most humbling and privileged things I've done in the last couple of years, without a shadow of a doubt.
I think you very soon learn that despite what you've come across in your professional life, the reality of hearing people's stories of the daily grind of poverty and how it impacts on them, it was very enlightening, I think, for me.
Trying to respond to people as human beings rather than cases, because that's sometimes what happens when you're in those kind of support organisations, that you can stop seeing the person and see the problem first. So there was a little bit of how's this going to work in a very different way than a meeting normally would, because we all go to lots of meetings, but this wasn't a meeting. This was a gathering and a conversation. Trying to psych myself up to be willing to have my assumptions really, really heavily challenged. So there was a sort of, talking to myself to be brave in that and admit when I didn't necessarily know stuff that perhaps I thought I should have done.
Yes, I learned a lot, and it was great hearing from people with lived experience.
I think it's had quite a profound effect on me in many ways. Just the hearing firsthand from the people with lived experience has been at times very moving and also very powerful. It's been galvanizing in terms of the sort of things that I do in my day-to-day life and the sort of things that I can influence. It's a sort of life affirming, really. Yeah, I think it's been life affirming.
Sometimes, you didn't know what was coming. You were just coming and, listening and hearing. And yes, I will recommend that process.
This approach takes longer, is more complicated, needs more resource, but ultimately develops sort of like much more powerful solutions.
The bit that I think I will take forward more is the idea of bringing your whole self into the room. So, not just relying and encouraging people to not just use their professional selves if they're there for, a work role that they have, but actually bring your own lived experience in.
Absolutely want to continue to use this way of working in the work environment. And yes, we have done it to a limited extent previously, but I think the range of people from a lived experience commissioner group that were in this was far wider than anything we'd achieve on our own. But when you hear the variety of experiences that we heard and had the opportunity to engage with, I mean, that's just mind-blowingly wonderful gold, isn't it, to have that range.
And that time I spent with Cyril and the other grassroots commissioners has reinforced the need for us to think about poverty and for backgrounds, and to make sure that in our thinking and in the way that we recruit, that we don't miss those opportunities to have that kind of breadth of thought and lived experience in terms of us and how we police the decisions that we make, and that's at all levels of the organisation.
I'm not driving, look. I'm stationary.
I know you're not, so I just can't help myself.
There's my wheel. No, I did contemplate trying to style it out and pretending that my camera was broken so you didn't see that I was in the car, but I thought you'd rather see me big coat and all. I think for me, some of the real lessons is how people with lived experience are involved in not just decision making, but the very early stages. But I suppose the thing that sticks with me is that if in the city over 40% of kids are growing up in poverty, this isn't an EDI strategy. This is nearly a majority of our citizens. So there's something for me that has to shift around the way that we think about it as a city. So it's not just seen as dealing with another disadvantaged group, but in many areas of the city, it's dealing with the majority of our citizens. And I just think there's something for me coming out of the Poverty Truth Commission about how that's embedded into everyone's way of thinking, not just as an extra consultation group that we can go to.
Again, going back to use of this process, the reason I got into housing in the first place was because there's some voluntary work I did at university in Drumchapel in Glasgow, where a whole lot of people had been shifted from the Gorbals, slum clearance. We'll give them a better life. We'll give them inside toilets and central heating, and their lives were blighted by being put on this enormous estate with no facilities and no transport. And yet, how many times on a smaller scale do we, in local authorities, in housing organisations, make well-intentioned decisions which, as we talked about, we think are solving problems for people, but actually we haven't heard their side of things and really engaged with it, and that the things that will make a difference to them are not necessarily the things that we think.
I suppose the personal impact, yes, hearing some of the stories, that was quite moving, but also really, encouraged by the bravery, of people to share some of this, because like, Paul, Bev and others have mentioned, we all have our stories, but usually don't bring it into the fore and don't talk about it, so I felt really encouraged by the bravery of people wanting to engage with, civic business leaders and talking about that.
Also watching our grassroots commissioners grow and seeing what it gave them. And for me, it was worth it, even if we've touched the lives of those few people, because that will send impact and ripples out, won't it? I think the responsibility now is that we hear their authentic voices and we do something about what they've been brave enough to share with us. Health inequalities in Manchester are not new. So the commitment for me would be that we, as the kind of anchor institutions, don't just continue to be part of the problem, we have to be part of the solution. For me, it's the hope of next steps, and as I said at the beginning, thinking about how we structure the NHS to better hear the voices of real people in our city, but also that we don't always just have people from privilege with middle class backgrounds sat in rooms making decisions about people who are living in poverty. So I'm really keen that, for me, the legacy of this is that we change our board structures to include socio-economic diversity. But we don't often actually look around the table and say, well, what's your income bracket? Are any of you on benefits? Do you have no food in your fridge? And here we are making decisions about people's lives without feeling the cold and the hunger and the desperation that comes with the fragility that poverty brings to people's lives.
Some of the people that have, some of the people with lived experience have been through the toughest times, have their resilience has been nothing but admirable. It makes you think about the sort of narrative that's out there about poverty and people who are living in poverty. You sort of know going into it, nobody wants to live in poverty, but actually the people who are desperately trying to get the hell out of it and just meet unreasonable barriers all the way through. As I go through my day-to-day work, both as somebody who leads an institution and also has got a civic responsibility to think about the impact that what the decisions that I make have on people's life chances and on their lives, particularly with respect to poverty.
Regardless of whether you've got a vulnerability, whatever it may be, in my industry, it can be really daunting walking into a bank and talking about your finances. And I just think that's been my kind of little glory, if you like, around understanding more about what people are going through on a day-to-day basis and just talking about how important it is to find out about your customers and people who are walking through the doors, because everybody's got a story to tell and they're all different.
And I think what was really lovely was that we stayed in the making relationships phase. And I think some people got a bit like, well, what are we doing here? This is, What's it about? We're chatting to each other about what our values are, what happened in our early lives, all of this. But I think that was really, really important, because what I saw as well, and what I clearly saw when I'd gone out and come back in, even more starkly, was at the beginning there was that sort of divide, really, wasn't there, between grassroots commissioners and civic leader, which wasn't there, you know, people in the same group, but you sort of felt that divide in the room. And then over time that got less and less and less. And I think that was because we'd spent so long getting to know each other, trusting each other, and we became people together in the room. Because, you know, over the years, obviously, you know, I've been involved in lots of groups with like service user care involvement, public boards about this and that. But because that time doesn't go in, that divide, even if it's not a sort of hostile, I'm not suggesting it is a hostile divide, but there is that divide there. And I think this is the one group that I've really felt people felt we were all equally participating in by the end of it, which was, it was a lovely experience. And I think that's something I'm taking away of relationship-based practice. Yes, yes, yes.